What was it like being gay in 1989?
Well, I could go back even further and talk about like 1979 before the big disaster happened. And that was fabulous, really. As long as you were in a big city, New York, San Francisco, it was just wild and wide open, and people were not very much activists because nobody felt like they needed to be, because we had won what we wanted, which was to be able to...
We had our gay pride.
Yeah, and to, do whatever we wanted, wherever we wanted to do it, which is pretty much what it was doing. But then in the 80s, things took a very nasty turn with the AIDS epidemic, and people started to realize that all that freedom that we thought we had, and all that maybe respect that we had, and power that we didn't actually have at all. And people started to freak out as everybody started to get sick. I was doing ACT UP, and I was trying to think of what else I could possibly do that would be more effective than just being one more person getting arrested, at a demonstration, lying down the street. There was this gay paper in New York in those days, but it was run by these really eccentric people, and they didn't even believe that HIV was the cause of AIDS, and they hated ACT UP, and they never reported on it. And just this light bulb just suddenly went on in my head. It was like, oh my God, what if we started a new gay publication that reflected, this new activism that was represented by ACT UP and all that stuff? And the idea just like seized me completely. I was like, oh my God, that would make a really big difference.
There were people reporting the AIDS crisis, of course, and the AIDS activism and everything like that, but there wasn't really a place, one source where you could get all of it in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, but they weren't even really reporting it that much. I mean, if a group like ACT UP had a giant demonstration and say, closed down the Brooklyn Bridge for 4 hours in snarled traffic, then that would make, page 23 of the Daily News kind of thing. But as far as people actually reporting on what was actually happening, the problem was people weren't. It's just such a different universe from today when like gay stuff is all over the place. People weren't reporting it at all. There were major newspapers that didn't, right up until the mid and late 1980s, did not report anything about the AIDS epidemic. They had a policy that you couldn't mention homosexuality in a family newspaper because 8-year-olds might read it and go, "Mommy, what's a homosexual?" And you can't have that. So you just couldn't even report, much less people actually reporting the minute details of activism and new drugs that are coming up and who's doing what and who's not doing what. It wasn't being reported. Well, I mean, it really shook up the gay and lesbian press. That was one huge thing. It ushered in the era, and I know it sounds almost ridiculous today because it's so obvious, but ushered in the era of the gay and lesbian press. In those days, the gay press, there were some lesbian magazines, and there was the gay press, which was just for gay men, basically. Outweek was the first major publication that was for gay men and lesbians, and had a staff that was part women and part men. It added a feistiness to gay media that I think is a lasting legacy, and the staff is a lasting legacy. So many people, yourself included, their very first writing gigs were at Outweek Magazine. People would say, "Oh, there's so much important news that you need, and there's only so much room in a magazine. Why are you giving room to these crazy?" But it was part of that world that I wanted to show to people, that there's this huge, fabulous world of just brilliant, crazy people, and that was part of it. Tell people what you were doing, because the Diary of a Mad Queen, you need to explain to people.
Well, I was doing, it was something called Diary of a Mad Queen, the drug-induced meanderings of this sort of psycho drag queen living in the gutter. And it was it was controversial too, because it was pretty far out there, and it was not in lockstep with the rest of the magazine. And that's what I loved about it, was that it would get like hate mail, but you guys were like, it's just another side of this wonderful world that we all have. That sort of brings me to Michelangelo Signorelli, who was a friend of yours, obviously beforehand. Were you good friends with him? How was it that he came on to the magazine?
Everybody pretty much came on from ACT UP. Virtually everybody in the original Outweek was an ACT UP activist, and they were people that I knew from ACT UP. So Michelangelo was the head of the media committee in ACT UP because he had worked in the PR world in New York and knew about media. So he was just a logical, passionate person to hire. He was one of the very first one or two people that I hired.
You outed celebrities, and you were the first magazine to do that.
Nobody was doing that. People thought that you would get sued if you did it. And Michelangelo sort of proved them wrong. I mean, his basic thesis in the very beginning was that not because he worked in the world of PR and public relations in New York, that not only were there a large number of lesbian and gay celebrities that were hurting the gay community while living in the closet themselves, but that their living in the closet was being facilitated by a large number of lesbian and gay gossip columnists and publicists who themselves were in the closet. And the classic example being Malcolm Forbes, who was, pretty wildly gay in his private life, but everybody in the public thought that he was in love with Elizabeth Taylor and they were about to get married. And those kinds of rumors, stories
were propagated by Liz Smith
and James Revson and all of these gossip columnists who themselves were closeted gay people. And this just infuriated Michelangelo. There was this sort of fundamental principle that the closet is sacred, that whatever you do in the gay world, you don't mess with the fact that people have the right to, in a homophobic world, have a right to live in the closet. And when you're talking about a private person, even to this day, that is true. But we were never talking about private people. And we weren't talking about people that lived in the closet the way that most, say, young people think of living in the closet. We were talking about people like Malcolm Forbes, or, for example, David Geffen, or somebody like that, who were openly gay in their private lives. They had come out of the closet years before to their families, to their friends, all that stuff. But they were maintaining a public closet because they thought that it would hurt their careers or embarrass them publicly if the public knew. That's very different from somebody who's, struggling with their sexuality and they haven't told their family yet or whatever. We never ever talked about people like that. We were just talking about public figures that were already out in their private lives. People never got that at that time. And they thought that we were doing this really terrible thing, and it was just hugely controversial. And everybody, as you say, yourself included, were horrified by it. But as the years went by, people thought about it. People didn't have the resources to do real investigative journalism in those days on the gay side of the equation. And certainly the New York Times or other publications that do investigative journalism were never going to hire gay people to investigate stuff in the gay world. So I was like, aha, I'll do that. One of the first ones was the Covenant House scandal. Covenant House was a huge Roman Catholic series of homes for wayward youth, I guess you would say, that was run by this charismatic priest named Father Ritter. And he was molesting the boys in his care. And we broke that story, which led to a huge national scandal that involved President Bush, and it brought down Covenant House. Father Ritter was ultimately forced to resign. The Pope weighed in on it. There had been rumors of him doing this, but they were unconfirmed rumors because none of the kids involved would step forward. And we finally got this young man who had been in the care of Covenant House for quite a number of years and had been Father Ritter's, boy toy for when he was 15, 16, 17, whatever, who agreed to go on the record. That really broke it open because there was a face that you could actually put to the story. So that was a really big one. Another really big one was the Woody Myers. I don't remember this, but when David Dinkins, he was elected mayor with the huge support of the gay community. And one of the first things he did was to appoint as the health commissioner, a man named Woody Myers, who had been the health commissioner of Indiana. And it turned out that during his tenure in Indiana, he had advocated for that people with AIDS should be quarantined, should essentially be put like in concentration camps. Nobody knew this, but I dug around because nobody was doing that kind of investigative reporting. I was like, well, who is this guy? I started calling around to gay groups in Indiana, and they were like, oh my God, Woody Myers, he tried to have us all quarantined, and the New York Times didn't have this, the Daily News didn't have it. They would never have reported that, even if they did find it out, because they wouldn't even have thought that it was important. But we splashed that on, and that turned into the biggest scandal in the history of the Dinkins administration. I mean, it brought his administration to a screeching halt, and that was fun. It was really fun doing that kind of investigative reporting, and that's what I like to do.
There would not be a gay publishing industry now without Outweek, right?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that publishing just in general has really just collapsed, basically. I mean, the magazines that came in the wake of Outweek, like Pause and Out Magazine and things like that, are really pretty much on their knees. It's almost impossible to make any money. People don't really buy magazines anymore. They just want to read everything free online. What mainstream journalists tell me is the big legacy of Outweek, is that prior to Outweek, you could and almost were expected, if you wrote for the New York Times or the Daily News or Time Magazine or whatever, to ignore gay stuff. And after Outweek, that was over. In a weird way, the necessity for having publications like Outweek began to go away, because you could now read the major gay news stories right in your local newspaper. If this were 1985, those stories wouldn't even be in the newspaper. You would have to have a gay publication to read about that stuff, because the New York Times would have a blanket policy. We just don't even report on that. But now it's in the paper all the time, and many, many, many mainstream journalists, straight journalists, have told me at conferences and stuff like that, it was Outweek Magazine that made that. We sort of look at mainstream journalism as before Outweek Magazine and after Outweek Magazine. And I think that is the lasting legacy. It probably would have happened eventually anyway, because the world was changing. As you can now see that we've got all these states with same-sex marriage, the world has really changed. But we gave it a gigantic push at just the moment that it was kind of ready to go. There was never a publication like Outweek before. There never really was since. It was unique.
Yeah.
And so it's really too bad what happened in the end. I feel very bad about it to this day.
Okay, listen, I'll talk to you later.
All right.
I love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.